For today's cup of coffee, not aliens, with vampires. That's my genre. This comes from Daily Mail and is by Ed Wight, and it was June the 10th of 2023. A mass grave containing over 400 suspected vampires has been uncovered during roadworks in Poland. The grim discovery in the village of Luzino, please forgive me if I've mispronounced that, which I'm sure I have, in the northeast of the country, found that some 450 skeletons had been beheaded and their skulls placed between their legs and a coin placed in their mouths. The practice, which was common in the region during the 19th century, was believed to remove the vampire curse. There's an archaeologist, and God bless anybody that can pronounce his name, said, quote, "We discovered examples of belief in the dead returning from the grave, which could only be stopped by decapitation. It was believed that if a member of the deceased's family died shortly after the funeral, then he or she could be a vampire. Therefore, after burial, the grave was dug up and the deceased's head was cut off, which was then placed in the legs. We also discovered an example of a woman after decapitation. The skull of a child was laid on her bosom," end quote. So I don't know if she had died in like childbirth or something like that. He added that around 30% of the graves uncovered, researchers had also found bricks placed next to the skeleton's legs, arms, and heads. In September last year, the remains of a female vampire pinned to the ground by a sickle across her throat and a padlocked toe to prevent her returning from the dead were also found in Poland. And I think that more than likely I did cover that one in a cup. You'd have to go and search for that. Discovered during archaeological work at a 17th century cemetery in the village of Pien, researchers also found the skeletal remains had a silk cap on its head, indicating that she had held a high social status. Records of myths about the undead date back as far as the 11th century in Central Europe. People feared that some who were buried would claw their way back up to the surface as blood-sucking monsters and terrorize the living. It is not uncommon in the region to find burial sites where a metal rod or a stake have been hammered through the skull of the deceased. People at the time believed this was one way to ensure that the person stayed dead. And we laugh at that. It's like, oh, well, how ignorant were these people? Well, this was before embalming and such. And so it was possible that somebody could be buried alive, which is one of a huge fears of mine. And I can't remember if it was in Brazil or one of these countries. That happens not infrequently. In fact, there had recently been a woman who had been buried alive and had been knocking on the door of her coffin, on the lid of her coffin. And they were able to rescue her. And I'm sure it had to do with the trauma, but a few days later, she died again. So I don't know if they have some catatonia going on there, if they have people that don't know to put a mirror up to somebody's nose and mouth to see if it's going to fog over. Not quite sure, but I think that maybe they need to get a little bit better of a coroner there. But the legends of the vampires, something that has always fascinated me, even since I was a child, and because I was born weird. Just grew up weird. And how the legend of the vampire has changed over the centuries, and that every culture has its legends of vampires, and the ones like in India and Japan and China, totally different than the Western version of vampires. And the original version of vampires they looked more like Nosferatu. They were not these suave, beautiful creatures that were granted immortality with just the, bad habit of having to drink blood. No, they were more like ghouls. They were heinous. They stank. They were not something that you wanted to be or be around. So that's part of the legend of why people were afraid of the dead coming back to life in a bad way. Now, there are legends of the dead coming back to life in a good way, but that's for another cup. If you've had experiences with the paranormal or supernatural, encounters with UFOs, aliens, cryptids, you can give me an email, cupofcoffeewithscream@gmail.com, and the email address will be there in the description box, as will the link to the article. There were a couple of other pictures, and this one wasn't the best, but as far as I really don't have the software to sit there and try to blow that up and alter it that much. Maybe someday. It's baby steps. We still doing the diagnose. Baby steps. Like, share, comment, subscribe. Shanghai other people on our little haunted pirate ship to enjoy the mirth. Main thing, know that you're loved. And whatever you're going through, where you are today is not where you're always going to be. So don't despair. Always keep hope alive. You are loved. Even if it's just by a little mountain goth lady, you are loved. Lord willing, we'll see you on the next cup. Bye.